On the morning of June 30th, 1908, the Siberian sky lit up in a way no human had ever seen before. It was just after 7 a.m. when villagers in central Russia looked up and saw a ball of fire tearing across the sky. Some thought it was the sun itself breaking apart. Others swore it was the end of the world. Moments later, the ground began to shake. A shockwave, so powerful it could have toppled buildings in Moscow, travelled hundreds of kilometres across Siberia. Windows shattered and horses bolted. But the strangest detail wasn't the blinding light or the earth-shaking roar. It wasn't even the forest, where nearly 80 million trees were instantly flattened, covering more than 2,000 square kilometres. The strangest part was this: there was no crater. When scientists finally reached the site almost 2 decades later, they expected to find a smoking pit in the ground, evidence of an asteroid or a comet impact. But the Earth was intact. Instead, the forest looked as if some colossal force had swept through it from above, levelling everything in its path, yet leaving behind no solid trace of what had actually struck. For decades, the Tunguska event has remained one of history's greatest mysteries, a blast that released more energy than the Hiroshima bomb, but seemingly came from nowhere. So what was it? A comet? An asteroid? Some experiment gone wrong? Or maybe something not from this world at all? Living in a remote Siberian village in 1908, life was already hard. Brutal winters, scarce supplies, isolation from the rest of the world. Most people were farmers, herders or hunters, depending on the land and the forest for survival. Days were quiet and predictable. Now imagine, without warning, the sky itself turned against you. Eyewitnesses described what happened that morning in haunting detail. A man named Semyon Semyonov was sitting on his porch when he saw a ball of fire tearing across the sky. He later recalled, "I sat on the steps of my house facing north. Suddenly the sky in the north split apart, and there appeared a fire that spread over the whole northern part of the firmament. At this moment, I felt intense heat, as if my shirt had caught fire. I wished to tear my shirt off and throw it away, but a powerful blast threw me down from the steps. I fainted, but my wife ran from the house and helped me up. After that, we heard a very loud knocking, as if stones were falling from the sky." Another villager, 40 miles from the explosion, said the heat was so intense he thought his clothes had caught fire. In some areas, people fainted from the sudden pressure wave. Glass shattered in windows, hundreds of kilometres away. Even in Britain, thousands of miles away, people reported glowing skies for days afterward, bright enough to read a newspaper at midnight without a lamp. At the epicentre, near the Podkamennaya Tunguska River, the damage was beyond comprehension. Forests that had stood for centuries were flattened like matchsticks, all radiating outward from a single point. Later, scientists would estimate that 80 million trees had been knocked down. Herds of reindeer were incinerated. Birds dropped from the sky. The explosion released energy between 10 and 15 megatons of TNT. That's like Hiroshima, only 10 times bigger. But if you'd walked to the very centre of the devastation, you wouldn't have found a crater. Instead, trees were left standing upright but stripped bare, like blackened matchsticks, pointing straight upward, as if something had exploded in the sky just above them. The force wasn't confined to Siberia. Seismographs across Europe recorded tremors at the same moment. In Britain, strange glowing skies were seen for nights on end, likely caused by atmospheric dust thrown up into the stratosphere. In fact, for months, atmospheric anomalies were reported around the globe. Sunsets painted in strange colours, nights unnaturally bright. The Earth's atmosphere had been disturbed by something massive. The native Evenki people of Siberia believed a god had punished the Earth. Some described it as Agdi, the god of thunder, throwing down fire from the heavens. Others thought it was a shamanic curse, unleashed on those who had broken sacred taboos. For years, locals avoided the site, whispering about an evil place where the spirits had burned the earth. Even hunters wouldn't go near it. If all this sounds far-fetched, consider this. There are places on Earth where weird distortions really do happen. I did a whole video on the zone of silence in northern Mexico, where signals vanish, compasses spin, and hikers swear they lose time itself. Tunguska may have been an explosion, yes, but the idea of the Earth harbouring zones of strangeness, that's not so outlandish. I'll leave a link to that video at the end if you want to dive into it yourself. Back to the video. You see, superstition could only explain so much. Scientists wanted hard evidence. Explosions leave evidence. Meteorites leave craters. Volcanoes leave ash. But in Tunguska there was nothing solid to examine. Only trees knocked down in a radial pattern, pointing to a blast that seemed to come from above rather than from the ground. That's why this story refuses to die. Because everything about it seems familiar, like an asteroid strike, like a nuclear explosion. But at the same time, it breaks the rules of nature as we know them, and that's precisely where the mystery begins. For nearly 2 decades after the Tunguska explosion, most of the world ignored it. Not because it wasn't spectacular enough, but because of where it happened, the deep Siberian wilderness, a place so isolated that even the Russian Empire had little reach there. The shockwaves and glowing skies were recorded as far away as Europe, but in Moscow they were treated as curiosities. A meteor, perhaps. Strange weather. Nothing worth mounting an expedition into the swamps and biting insects of Siberia. If you think about it, in our world today, satellites would pinpoint the blast in seconds. Military analysts would swarm the region. Teams of scientists would be on site within hours. But in 1908, there were no satellites, no helicopters, no reliable roads. Even reaching the Tunguska region meant weeks of trudging through bogs and taiga. And Russia in the early 20th century had bigger problems. Think political unrest, food shortages, and a looming revolution. Siberia's strange explosion was filed away as an oddity. No follow-up, no urgency. It wasn't until the 1920s, after the Soviet Union was born, and eager to showcase its scientific strength, that the mystery resurfaced. The man who changed everything was Leonid Kulik, a mineralogist at the Soviet Academy of Sciences. Passionate about meteors, Kulik was convinced that a gigantic meteorite had struck Siberia in 1908. If he could locate it, it would be the discovery of a lifetime. He petitioned the Academy for funding. At first they resisted. Siberia was treacherous, expensive, and unpredictable. But Kulik argued that the Soviet Union could stake a claim as the first nation to recover a massive extraterrestrial object. National pride made the difference, and the project got its funding. In 1927, nearly 2 decades after the event, Kulik and his team finally set off. The journey was brutal. Supplies spoiled, rivers had to be crossed by makeshift rafts, and swarms of mosquitoes tormented the men. But when they neared the blast zone, something extraordinary came into view. Forests destroyed on a scale none of them had ever seen. Kulik carefully mapped the pattern. To his astonishment, everything radiated outward from a single point, as though some unimaginable force had exploded above the land. He felt certain that just beyond the next ridge, he would stumble on a vast crater. He pressed on, measuring, surveying, calculating. But when he reached the very heart of the devastation, the ground was ordinary. No hole, no buried meteorite. This was his first great shock, the absence of what should have been undeniable evidence. Still, Kulik didn't give up. He was sure the meteorite's remains must have sunk deep into the boggy permafrost. He ordered trenches dug, swamps drained, and soil examined. Days turned into weeks, yet not a single fragment was recovered. The team did find scorched trees and strange growth patterns, but nothing they could hold in their hands and point to as extraterrestrial material. Kulik also interviewed the local Evenki people who had lived closest to the epicenter. Their stories were chilling. They spoke of the sky splitting open, a second sun blazing across the sky, a roaring wind that tore through the forest, herds of animals consumed by fire. Some Evenki whispered of curses and forbidden spirits. The site, they said, was poisoned. To go near it was to risk madness or death. Kulik listened, but he was a man of science. He filed the testimonies away as cultural folklore, yet even he couldn't deny the detail and consistency of their accounts. Back in Moscow, Kulik's reports created a stir. Here was a natural phenomenon on a scale no one had documented before. It became a matter of pride. Soviet science would solve what the Tsarist regime had ignored. Funds for further expeditions were released. Kulik returned several times through the 1930s, always hoping that the next trench, the next dig, would reveal the elusive meteorite. But each time, the land gave him nothing. By the 1930s, another unsettling comparison began to surface. The Tunguska blast zone bore uncanny similarities to the aftermath of what would later be known as atomic explosions. Trees stripped upright at the center, shockwaves radiating outward, soil disturbances that looked eerily like blast effects. And this was before the world even knew what nuclear weapons were. Scientists of Kulik's day couldn't make that comparison. But in hindsight, the parallels are undeniable. How could an event in 1908 mimic the signature of technology not invented until the 1940s? The clearest way to approach all the questions you might have is through the scars etched into the Earth itself, and none is more haunting than the geometry of Tunguska's destruction. Seen from above, the trees were flattened in all directions. At the centre there wasn't a crater, just upright trunks, scorched and bare, still standing. Gee. This is exactly what happens when a powerful blast occurs in the air, not on the ground. Scientists now call this an air burst. But in 1908, the concept was unheard of. Kulik had no framework for it. He simply knew that whatever happened had released energy on a scale that dwarfed anything nature should have been capable of without leaving behind debris. And the missing crater doesn't simplify things, it complicates them even further. It rules out the simplest explanation: a meteor impact. Every known meteor strike leaves behind some geological scar. For example, the Barringer crater in Arizona is nearly a kilometre wide, caused by a meteor far smaller than what Tunguska should have been. If a 50 to 100 metre rock had slammed into Siberia, it should have carved a crater hundreds of metres across. Instead, there was nothing. This single fact is what turns Tunguska from a geological anomaly into a full-blown mystery. Adding to the puzzle were the strange atmospheric effects recorded in the aftermath. In Scotland, people thought the aurora borealis had shifted south. People in Sweden and Norway saw silver clouds, now known as noctilucent clouds, high in the atmosphere. These had never been widely reported before Tunguska. Scientists suggested that fine dust from the explosion had been blasted into the upper atmosphere, scattering sunlight across the night sky. But again, the question lingered. If no crater existed, where did all this material come from? Then there was the issue of fire. Herds of reindeer were incinerated. Trees were scorched. Witnesses reported seeing a ball of fire streak across the sky before the explosion. Yet when Kulik studied the site years later, he noticed something odd. Large areas of forest showed no signs of burning at all. It was as though the explosion produced both fire and not fire. A searing flash of heat followed immediately by a shockwave so immense that it blew out the flames before they could spread. The Tunguska blast behaved less like a natural wildfire and more like the detonation of a massive bomb. When the world later saw Hiroshima in 1945, a disturbing realization clicked into place. The Tunguska event looked almost exactly like the aftermath of an atomic explosion. The radial treefall, the upright charred trunks at the epicenter, the atmospheric disturbances, even the reports of people burned by the heat far from the blast zone. All of it mirrored nuclear test sites. But Tunguska happened 37 years before humans split the atom. This eerie resemblance has fueled decades of speculation. Could Tunguska have been a natural nuclear event, perhaps a comet loaded with volatile materials? Or was it something more sinister, or even extraterrestrial? Over the decades, scientists have run countless models trying to replicate Tunguska. Computer simulations of asteroids entering the atmosphere at high speed suggest that a large stony body could have disintegrated before impact, releasing its energy as an airburst. This would explain the lack of a crater. It might also account for the atmospheric dust. By the mid-20th century, Tunguska had shifted from a little-known Siberian curiosity into a cultural phenomenon. Writers, scientists, and conspiracy theorists all seized on the riddle of the blast without a crater. In the vacuum left by science's uncertainty, another idea rushed in, one that has captivated imaginations for more than a century. If Tunguska wasn't a comet, and it wasn't an asteroid, then what if it wasn't natural at all? What if something or someone had come from beyond the Earth and exploded in the Siberian sky? The alien theory didn't spring up immediately. In the 1920s and 30s, few people were talking about UFOs, let alone extraterrestrial spacecraft. But as Kulik's expedition circulated in the press, reports of flattened forests, glowing skies, and a missing crater, speculative voices began to wonder if this might not be a meteor at all, but a machine. A craft of some kind, a ship that malfunctioned, or perhaps a vessel destroyed on purpose, detonated before it could reach the ground. These were whispers at first, tucked away in fringe journals and Soviet science fiction. But after World War II, when UFO sightings surged across the globe, the whispers grew louder. In the Soviet Union, the Tunguska event became fertile ground for writers of speculative fiction. Stories appeared in pulp magazines imagining alien explorers who had flown too close to Earth and perished. Others suggested a cosmic battle had taken place, with one craft destroyed in the Siberian sky while another escaped. These stories were technically fiction, but they reflected something deeper, a gnawing sense that Tunguska's blank spot, the missing crater, needed an extraordinary explanation. By the 1960s, Soviet scientists themselves began to toy with the idea more openly. The Cold War had pushed both America and Russia into the age of rockets and satellites. Suddenly, the concept of advanced machines falling from the sky no longer felt far-fetched. One of the more intriguing twists in the alien hypothesis is the idea of a controlled detonation. Eyewitnesses reported that the fireball seemed to change direction slightly before the explosion. Some even said it split into two, like a craft attempting evasive maneuvers. Then came the flash, the roar, and the shockwave. If this were true, then Tunguska wasn't an accident. It was a deliberate act. A pilot Hosaiin, human or otherwise, sacrificing their craft to prevent a collision with the Earth's surface. This interpretation turns the story into something bigger, not just a disaster, but a close call that saved us. Of course, not every theory painted aliens as benevolent. Some suggested the blast was a demonstration, a cosmic show of force, a weapon unleashed in the middle of nowhere to remind humanity of its fragility. Why Siberia? Because it was remote, safe, uninhabited, a test site chosen by others. This darker version casts Tunguska as the opening move in a game far larger than human politics. A warning perhaps, or an experiment in atmospheric energy, released using technology far beyond ours. In later decades, rumours spread of anomalous materials discovered at the site, strange metallic spheres, or fragments with unearthly isotopic ratios. Most of these claims never held up under scrutiny, but they fueled speculation that the Soviet government had quietly retrieved pieces of something and buried the results. Even today, fringe researchers point to scattered reports of magnetic anomalies, unusual soil chemistry, and odd patterns in tree growth as signs that something more than a natural explosion occurred. By the late 1940s and 1950s, as UFO sightings filled newspapers worldwide, Tunguska was retroactively folded into the narrative. Here was the first crash, the event that had happened before Roswell, before flying saucers became part of the cultural imagination. For many UFO researchers, Tunguska was evidence that we'd been visited long before we were technologically advanced enough to notice. It became a cornerstone in the lore of alien encounters, a mystery whose timing was too strange, whose details were too cleanly unexplained to be anything else. Of course, mainstream scientists bristled. They argued that invoking aliens was a distraction from genuine research. An interstellar spacecraft exploding in the atmosphere, they pointed out, should have left behind exotic metals or radioactive traces. No such evidence was ever confirmed. But skeptics also admitted that the alien theory thrived for a reason, because all the natural explanations came with their own gaping holes. And when the universe leaves a vacuum of certainty, imagination is quick to fill it. Even today, more than a century later, the idea of Tunguska as an alien event refuses to die. It sits at the crossroads of mystery and fear, hope and suspicion. Because deep down, the alien hypothesis isn't just about Tunguska. It's about us, about whether we're alone, about whether other civilizations are out there. And if they are, whether they come as explorers, guardians, or conquerors. Let's get back to the alien idea for a second. The alien idea is seductive. It thrills the imagination. But most scientists prefer to keep their feet on firmer ground. For them, the Tunguska event doesn't need interstellar visitors or hidden weapons. The answer, they argue, is written in stone and ice. A body from space, a rock, a comet, an asteroid, entering the Earth's atmosphere at impossible speed and disintegrating before it could touch the ground. This is what the scientists believe. Comets are made mostly of ice and dust, fragile compared to solid asteroids. If such a body entered the atmosphere at tens of thousands of kilometers per hour, the heat and pressure would cause it to vaporize explosively in the air. The energy released would be enormous, more than enough to explain the devastation in Siberia. The comet theory neatly explained why there was no crater and no rocky fragments. The icy body, scientists argued, simply evaporated in the atmosphere, leaving behind only dust. That dust could have drifted high into the stratosphere, scattering sunlight and producing the glowing skies reported across Europe. But there were problems. If a comet had exploded in the sky, Kulik and later researchers expected to find certain chemical fingerprints, higher concentrations of water in the soil, or unusual isotopes frozen into tree rings from 1908. But those signatures were never found in amounts large enough to be convincing. And then there was the energy. For a comet made mostly of ice to release 10 to 15 megatons of force, it would have needed to be massive. Far larger than what eyewitnesses described streaking across the sky. But could ice alone really unleash such fury? There was still some doubt. Others turned to asteroids for an answer. Unlike fragile comets, asteroids are made of dense rock and metal. They can pack an incredible punch when they hit a planet. The asteroid theory argued that Tunguska wasn't a comet at all, but a stony asteroid about 50 to 60 meters wide. Traveling at 30,000 miles per hour, it would have slammed into the atmosphere, heated up, and shattered violently. The blast would have released its energy in mid-air, what scientists call an airburst. That, they said, was why no crater was found. The rock never reached the ground. And this idea gained traction because it matched computer simulations. When researchers modelled a stony asteroid breaking apart in the atmosphere, the results looked eerily similar to Tunguska, a butterfly-shaped blast zone, a shockwave that circled the globe, and no impact crater. Basically, if Tunguska was an asteroid, even one that exploded in mid-air, scientists expected to find small fragments, meteorites scattered across the swampy ground. Kulik dug for them, drained bogs, sifted soil. Nothing. Later expeditions claimed to have found tiny, glass-like spherules in the soil. Microscopic beads formed when rock vaporizes at extreme heat. These were intriguing, but too sparse to serve as definitive proof. The asteroid theory was almost right, but still incomplete. But then there's the curious case of Andrei E. Zlobin, a researcher from the Russian Academy of Sciences Vernadsky State Geological Museum. During an expedition to Tunguska in 1988, Zlobin collected over 100 stones from the shoals of the Kushmo River, hoping one day they might yield answers. For years they sat in storage. Then in 2008, he revisited the collection and singled out 3 unusual pieces. He nicknamed them Dental Crown, Whale and Boat because of their strange melted shapes. The largest, Whale Kamt Moi, barely weighed 10 grams, yet showed shallow indentations called regmaglypts, the kind often etched into space rocks as they blaze through the atmosphere. Zlobin argued these fragments couldn't have been melted on the ground since the Tunguska blast didn't generate enough heat there. Instead, he believed they were cooked inside the fireball itself, high above Earth. His findings are intriguing, but they don't give us a clear answer. No full chemical analysis has yet confirmed their extraterrestrial origin, and skeptics question why he waited decades to release his data. Still, Zlobin's tiny stones add fuel to the fire. Maybe, just maybe, fragments of Tunguska's mystery really do exist, and are sitting quietly in boxes, waiting for someone to finally prove what happened that morning. For decades, Tunguska stood as the only known case of a major atmospheric explosion. But in 2013, something remarkable happened. The Chelyabinsk meteor entered the Earth's atmosphere over Russia. This asteroid, about 20 meters wide, exploded in the air with a force of around 500 kilotons. Far smaller than Tunguska, but still powerful enough to injure 1,500 people and shatter windows across 6 cities. Video footage from Chelyabinsk showed exactly how such events unfold. A blinding fireball streaking across the sky, followed by a delayed shockwave that rattled buildings and sent people flying. It was a modern-day echo of what the Tunguska witnesses described. And for many scientists, Chelyabinsk proved once and for all that Tunguska was the same kind of event, only much larger. Here's a question that should get you thinking. How does an asteroid destroy a forest without ever touching the ground? When a space rock slams into the atmosphere at hypersonic speeds, the air in front of it compresses faster than it can escape. Temperatures skyrocket to thousands of degrees. The pressure builds until the rock shatters violently, and the result is a massive explosion that releases its energy outward and downward like a bomb detonating above the Earth. With no crater or no impact, just devastation spread across the landscape. This explains why trees at the very centre of Tunguska remained upright but stripped. The blast came from above, pressing them downward instead of flattening them outward. On paper, it all fits. And yet, despite the elegance of the comet and asteroid explanations, doubts persist. Every neat theory still carries ragged edges. Mainstream science, in the end, leans heavily toward the asteroid airburst. The Chelyabinsk meteor gave them a working model, and computer simulations replicate Tunguska's destruction convincingly. But the problem is this: Tunguska isn't a computer model. It's a real event that left behind too many peculiarities. The lack of fragments, the eyewitness reports of multiple fireballs, the atmospheric anomalies lasted for weeks. So while the comet and asteroid theories are the safest bets, they are not airtight, and the gaps are wide enough for alternative explanations, stranger ones, to creep back in. History offers another case, one that unfolded just 22 years after the Tunguska event, half a world away. On August 13th, 1930, the skies over the Brazilian Amazon erupted. Eyewitnesses in the Curuça area reported fiery objects streaking overhead before detonating with thunderous roars. Shockwaves shook the jungle. Villagers claimed trees were flattened for miles, animals killed, and rivers churned with waves as though struck by invisible hands. Sound familiar? It should. The event was almost a carbon copy of Tunguska, only on a smaller scale. The region's remoteness meant no immediate investigation. For decades, the 1930 Brazilian blast lived mostly in rumour and tribal accounts. It wasn't until the 1990s that scientists pieced together records suggesting an atmospheric explosion equivalent to several megatons of TNT. But just like Tunguska, there were no craters and no major fragments. You see, not all sky explosions are so elusive. On February 12, 1947, a gigantic fireball blazed over eastern Siberia. This time, witnesses in the Sikhote-Alin mountains saw fragments raining down like artillery shells. The explosion flattened trees, gouged holes in the frozen ground, and left behind thousands of metallic fragments. Scientists recovered them by the truckload, over 70 tons of iron meteorite pieces. Unlike Tunguska, Sikhote-Alin gave science exactly what it expected: debris to weigh, touch, and catalogue. And that contrast is key. If Sikhote-Alin shows us what a normal meteorite airburst looks like, Tunguska looks less normal by comparison. One gave us fragments by the ton, the other dust at best. When you line these cases up side by side, a pattern emerges. Tunguska, 1908. Massive explosion. No crater. No large fragments. Curuça area, 1930. Similar devastation. No crater. Poorly investigated. Sikhote-Alin, 1947. Explosion plus fragments galore. The normal meteorite event. This recurring pattern makes one thing clear. Tunguska was not a myth. Events like this do happen. The Earth is struck more often than we like to think. Most are small. Some, like Chelyabinsk, are dangerous but survivable. Tunguska, however, was in a league of its own. And yet, for all the similarities, Tunguska still stands apart. It was bigger, brighter, stranger. It left behind fewer clues, and it sounded more like a bomb than a natural blast. Those other blasts may show us what's normal. Tunguska shows us what's not. The comet and asteroid theories fit neatly into equations, into simulations, into the realm of measurable physics. But Tunguska has never belonged entirely to the laboratory. From the moment trees fell and skies glowed, the mystery has been haunted by something else. The sense that natural explanations can only go so far. In the absence of certainty, the door swings open to stranger possibilities. The first figure to loom large in these alternative explanations wasn't from Siberia at all. It was an eccentric inventor living thousands of miles away in the United States, Nikola Tesla. Tesla, even in his own lifetime, seemed to straddle the line between science and magic. Brilliant and ambitious, he dreamed of harnessing energy in ways the world wasn't ready to believe. And in the years leading up to 1908, he was experimenting with something extraordinary. A wireless transmission of power, using his Wardenclyffe Tower in New York. Some fringe historians believe Tesla had developed what he later hinted at as a death ray, a directed energy weapon capable of unleashing destruction at vast distances. According to this theory, the Tunguska event was the accidental, or perhaps intentional test of that device. Tesla himself hinted in letters that he could project energy to any point on the globe. What if June 30th, 1908, was the day he tried? Mainstream historians dismiss this as fantasy. There's no record of Tesla having either the resources or the precision to direct energy halfway across the world. But the eerie resemblance between Tunguska's destruction and later atomic test sites keeps the theory alive in conspiracy circles. A forgotten genius, a tower of power, a blast across the planet. Other theories drift into even stranger territory. Some have suggested Tunguska was the result of a tear in space-time, a portal opening briefly in the Siberian sky. To them, the explosion was not the arrival of something, but the collapse of a rift between worlds, the symmetry of the destruction, the lingering atmospheric disturbances, even the strange reports of glowing nights across Europe, have been used to argue for a momentary rupture in reality itself. More extreme versions tie Tunguska to time travel experiments, a botched attempt to manipulate time that unleashed catastrophic energy. In this telling, Tunguska wasn't caused by something falling from the sky at all, but by human hands reaching into forces they couldn't yet control. It sounds like science fiction, and yet, when faced with an explosion with no source, the imagination looks for explanations as vast as the mystery itself. Another fringe explanation emerged in the late 20th century. The idea that Tunguska was caused by a miniature black hole passing through the Earth. One idea claimed a black hole the size of an atom hit Earth. With its immense weight, it could have unleashed huge energy in the atmosphere before continuing on, leaving no trace behind but the flattened forest. This theory fascinated some physicists for a time, but it carries a fatal flaw. If a black hole had passed through Earth, it should have created an exit explosion on the other side of the planet. No such blast was ever recorded. Mysteries spark speculation. But sooner or later, science comes back around, demanding answers grounded in physics, chemistry, and hard evidence. After decades of alien whispers and Tesla death rays, modern researchers have returned to Tunguska with sharper tools: satellite data, computer simulations, and geochemical analysis. And while their findings don't erase the mystery, they offer a sobering counterweight to the wilder theories. In the 1950s and 60s, Soviet teams revisited Tunguska with new technology. They scoured the soil, the rivers, the bogs, anywhere fragments of an extraterrestrial object might have hidden. At first they found nothing conclusive, but in later decades, tiny glassy spherules turned up, scattered through the peat. These microscopic beads contained traces of nickel and other elements rare in Earth's crust but common in meteorites. It wasn't much, but to scientists it was a promising lead. Perhaps the missing fragments weren't boulders or chunks but dust, pulverized in the explosion. Nature kept its own record of the blast. When researchers examined tree rings from the Tunguska zone, they discovered strange anomalies. Growth rings from 1908 showed sudden changes, as if the trees had been stressed by radiation or chemical shock. Some trees near the epicenter grew faster in the years after the explosion, possibly due to increased nutrients in the soil or genetic mutations triggered by the event. Skeptics point out that radiation is a loaded word. These changes don't prove nuclear energy was involved, but they do suggest that the explosion altered the environment in ways still not fully understood. In the 1990s and 2000s, scientists began running detailed computer models of asteroids entering Earth's atmosphere. Using equations of heat, velocity, and pressure, they simulated what would happen if a stony asteroid 50 to 100 meters wide came in at a shallow angle. The results were astonishingly close to Tunguska. The simulations showed the asteroid fragmenting under pressure, releasing its energy as a massive airburst 5 to 10 kilometers above the ground. The butterfly-shaped blast pattern was recreated, the scorched trees at the center explained, and even the lack of a crater made perfect sense. To many scientists, this closed the case. Tunguska was an asteroid airburst, no more exotic than Chelyabinsk in 2013, just vastly larger. Critical voices have consistently challenged the more sensational explanations for the Tunguska event, pointing out that none of them withstand careful scientific scrutiny. Take the claim that Nikola Tesla's Wardenclyffe Tower fired a death ray across the world. There is no evidence that the tower ever transmitted energy at any meaningful scale, let alone across continents. Even if it had, Tesla's experiments dealt with wireless transmission of power over relatively short distances. Nothing in his equipment could have produced a precisely targeted, Siberia-specific blast of such magnitude. The death ray explanation collapses under basic engineering reality. The mini black hole hypothesis sounds dramatic, but is equally flawed. A black hole passing through Earth would not only produce an entry explosion, but also an exit explosion on the opposite side. No such evidence exists. No blast scars, no seismic anomalies, nothing. Moreover, such an object would have caused far more catastrophic planetary consequences than the localized Tunguska devastation. The lack of a matching exit wound is enough to dismiss this idea outright. Alien spacecraft theories also falter under examination. A craft powerful enough to explode over Siberia would have left behind physical remains, structural fragments, exotic alloys, or at the very least traces of unknown isotopic compositions. Despite decades of searching, no such evidence has been verified. The soil and tree samples from the Tunguska region contain only common terrestrial materials, consistent with natural meteoritic or cometary debris. The complete absence of otherworldly residues makes the alien craft claim untenable. Today the consensus is cautious but firm. Tunguska was almost certainly the atmospheric explosion of a small asteroid or comet. The Chelyabinsk event gave living proof that such blasts can happen, and that they can devastate without leaving a crater. But even as science leans towards certainty, the mystery refuses to die completely. Because Tunguska is not just a question of physics, it is also a story. And stories live in the gaps where data runs thin. When I think about Tunguska, I keep coming back to one image, a forest flattened as far as the eye could see, yet no hole in the ground, no smoking crater. And I'll be honest, that unsettles me more than anything. Because explosions are supposed to make sense. You drop a bomb, you get a crater. You throw a rock, you see the dent. But Tunguska, it was like the sky itself flexed its muscles and then erased the evidence. The usual explanation sounds simple enough. A stony asteroid, about 60 meters across, broke apart in the sky. The blast packed the power of 1,000 Hiroshimas. Trees flattened, animals burned, skies lit up across the world. End of story. And honestly, part of me wants to accept that. It's neat, it's scientific. It puts the whole thing in a box where we can stop worrying about it. If Tunguska really was just a natural event, that's actually the scarier option, isn't it? Because it means this wasn't aliens or Tesla or gods punishing us. It was nature. Blind, indifferent nature. Here's what's even scarier when you consider it. This happened in Siberia, in a place where almost no one lived. But shift that trajectory a few hours and Saint. Petersburg could have been wiped out. Moscow could have been leveled. The same for London. Of course, part of me enjoys the wilder explanations too. I mean, come on. Tesla zapping Siberia with a prototype death ray. That's the kind of story you want to believe just for the sheer audacity of it. But here's the truth. We as a species don't fully know what happened in Tunguska. We may never fully know. And that's not just a gap in science, it's a reminder of our place in the universe. Tiny and vulnerable, at the mercy of forces we can't control. If Tunguska blew your mind, no pun intended, wait until you hear what happens in that desert I mentioned earlier.